we are going to discuss about modern theory of rent. Rent is found in land. Along with land, rent is also found in all factors of production. So, when the rent is found in all factors of production, it is termed as surplus. Mrs. John Robinson, the propagator of the modern theory of rent, says that the essence of the conception of rent is the conception of a particular factor of production over and above the minimum sum necessary to induce it to do its work. So basically, rent is actual earning minus transfer earnings. Rent is paid for specificity of factor. There are three kinds of factors of rent. So, perfectly specific factor, perfectly non-specific factor, and partially specific factor. Let's dig deep into these topics. Perfectly specific factor. This kind of factor of production is perfect in doing just one specific task at a time. For example, in a brick factory, a laborer just makes the bricks and does nothing else. So, he is perfect in doing just one job. So, this is perfectly specific factor. Perfectly non-specific factor. Perfectly non-specific factor is just opposite of perfectly specific factor. So in this, factors of production does many tasks at a time. Partially specific factor. This kind of factor of production can perform some task unlike perfectly specific and non-specific factors of production. This factor of production is a real life based one. In this, a laborer from a brick factory not only can perform just one job but also can perform many jobs imperfectly. The more the specificity of the factor, more will be the rent. Now, let's look into the features of modern theory of rent. Rent can be the part of income of all factors of production. Amount of rent depends upon the difference between actual earning and transfer earning. Rent arises when the supply of factor is either perfectly inelastic or less elastic.
So, to give you guys a deeper understanding of this topic, we have come up with an example of an employee whose actual earning is 10,000 rupees. So, in this table, as you can see, there are four aspects, which is actual earning, transfer earning, rent, and the analysis of each the four cases. In the first case, we can see that the actual earning of the employee is 10,000 rupees, and in the second column we have the transfer earning, which is 0 rupees. So, as we all know that the rent is the difference between the actual earning and transfer earning of a factor of production. So, the rent will be 10,000 rupees, and then as we can see, this is an example of a perfectly specific factor of production, which means that the employee cannot do any other job in any other firm except for this one. Now, let us look into the second case. Here, the actual earning is 10,000 and the transfer earning is 10,000 as well. So, the rent, which is the difference between the actual earning and the transfer earning, is 0. So, this case is an example of the perfectly non-specific factor of production, which means that the employee can shift to any job whenever he wants. Then we will come to the third case, in which the actual earning is 10,000, the transfer earning is 7,000, which means the rent is of 3,000. Hence, this is an example of a partially specific factor of production, which means that in this case the employee has been paid the rent of 3,000 rupees, and in the fourth case we can see that the transfer earning is more than the actual earning. So in this case the employee will not work and change his job, and then his transfer earning will become his actual earning. I hope this example helped you guys in understanding the factors of production. Now, let us look into some graphical representation of the kinds of factor of production in the context of rent. In the first diagram, we can see that the supply of factor is perfectly elastic. So in this diagram, we have taken the x-axis as the demand and supply of the factor of production and the y-axis as the price. Since supply is perfectly elastic, it is horizontal to the x-axis, and then we can also see that the demand curve is intersecting the supply curve at the point E, which will be the equilibrium point of the factor of production. And when we join point E to the x-axis, we will get point Q, and then we will be able to see the region OPEQ. So in this diagram, we can see that AE is OPEQ because the factor's price is equal to OP. Transfer earning is also OPEQ since the transfer earning is the lower portion of the supply curve, which in this case is OPEQ. So AE, which means the actual earning, is equal to OPEQ, and the transfer earning is also OPEQ. And as we all know that rent is equal to actual earning minus transfer earning, the rent will be zero because the supply of factor of production is perfectly elastic. And this was an example of a perfectly non-specific factor of production. In the second case, the supply of factor is perfectly inelastic. So again, the x-axis will be for the demand and supply, and the y-axis will be for the price of the factor of production. Since the supply is perfectly inelastic, it will be vertical to the x-axis, and the demand curve will be the same. And the point where the demand curve will intersect the supply curve will be marked as E, which means the equilibrium point of demand and supply. And after joining the point E to the x-axis, we will get the point Q. And now the actual earning will be OPEQ again for the same reason as in the first diagram. And in this case, the transfer earning will be zero since the transfer earning is the position below the supply curve and there is nothing below the supply curve. Now, as we can see, the actual earning is OPEQ and the transfer earning is zero, and the rent will be OPEQ because of the difference of transfer earning and actual earning is rent. And we all know that when actual earning is equal to rent, it is an example of a perfectly specific factor of production. Now, in the last case, the supply of factor is elastic. Now, we can take the x-axis as the demand and supply and the y-axis as the price of the factor of production. Since the factor of production is elastic, we will make an upward sloping curve, which will be the supply curve of the factor of production, and we will name it as S. Then we will see that the demand curve is the same, and the point of intersection of the supply and demand curve will be E, the equilibrium point of demand and supply. Now again, by joining this point E to x-axis, we will get the point Q. Once again, the actual earning will be OPEQ and the transfer earning will be SEQ because the transfer earning is the portion below the supply curve. After subtracting the actual earning, which is OPEQ, with the transfer earning, which is SEQ, we will get OPEF, which will be the rent of the factor of production. And this was an example of a partially specific factor of production. So, by this, we are done with the topic of modern theory of rent. Now, we have Brother Shashank who will be explaining about the Quasi Rent.
Now, let us discuss Quasi Rent. The concept of Quasi Rent was given by Albert Marshall. He defined Quasi Rent as surplus earnings generated by the factors of production, except land. Quasi Rent can also be expressed in terms of revenue. quasi rent is equals to total revenue minus total variable cost. In the long run, all the costs are considered as variable cost. In long run, the equilibrium can be attained when total revenue is equals to total cost. In such a case, there is no quasi rent. For example, there is a sudden increase in the demand of houses, but the supply of houses does not increase with that speed because of that building material. Thus, the sudden increase in the return from selling of houses is termed as quasi rent. Let us see the graphical representation of the diagram. In this diagram, S and S represents inelastic supply curve. The demand and supply curve intersects at point E. At point E, the price is equals to OP and quantity of equipment is OS. In the short run, the increased demand D dash and D dash reaches to the price level of OP dash with a constant supply of OS. As the number of equipment is constant in short run, therefore the transfer earnings are zero and quasi rent is equals to total earnings from the equipment. However, in long run, the supply of equipment PL is perfectly elastic. Therefore, any number of equipment can be supplied at OP. Now, the supply reaches to OM and price falls to E double dash M. The quasi rent would disappear because the price gets equals to transfer earnings OP. So by this we learned how quasi rent works. Here are the following topics which were discussed in this video.
Thank you guys for watching this video.
It was indeed a great learning for all of us.
We will be back with yet another video.
Please like, share and subscribe. And don't forget to press the bell icon